Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce Steve Long. He will be doing a one-minute overview by Milton Steinberg as a driven lead. So I will let Steve take over. Steve, please.
I'm reviewing the book called As a Driven Lead by Milton Steinberg. It's a Jewish American novel, a historical novel. It was written and published in 1939. So this is a Jewish American writer, right during the beginning of the Holocaust. And he was someone who was not real well known. So basically, this author died when he was 46. So he lived from 1903 to 1950, passed away. He had written this one novel, and then he was working on the second novel when he passed away. So Chaim Potok was around the 1950, and he wanted to clear this guy's name when he passed away because there's criticism that he had written about an atheist, okay, which is not typically done in rabbinic circles. So Potok wrote the foreword, and this is the best information on the author, okay? This is what Potok says. Steinberg's live, born in Rochester, New York, lived in Manhattan. He's affiliated with Jewish Theological Seminary, which is on the Upper East Side. And then I know from other sources that he studied graduate school at Columbia University, and he had the ambition to reconcile Jewish faith and Greek philosophy. Okay, so how's that for ambitious? So this is an interesting person. So he wrote the novel about a character, historical novel about a character who actually lived. Okay, this is in the Talmud. And this guy's name is Elisha ben Abuya, who we know was the first rabbinic scholar in Israel to reject the existence of God. Okay, so sounds kind of radical, but so this is what Potok wrote about this guy, and this is what we know from history. This guy was accused of being an apostate. He was a dualist, lover of harlots, okay, betrayer of the Jews. So he betrayed his own country to the Roman Empire after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And then he read Greek books. And then his lasting fame or infamy rests on his having been one of a minute number of rabbis excommunicated during the entire 800 years of the rabbinic period. The reason for the excommunication came down to us as a tale. It appears that one day Elisha ben Abuya stood watching a man climb up a ladder to send away a mother bird before taking down its nest of fledglings, of which the Bible, in conformity with Deuteronomy, promises a long life. Okay, this is Deuteronomy law about releasing the mother bird and you'll live a long life. Instead, the man fell to his death from the ladder. In enraged, Elisha denied the divine providence with the words, "There is no justice, there is no God." Okay, so he just says, "I can't tolerate this," and he walks out. Okay. So the interesting thing about this historical novel is that it's really the best source of history, really, for Palestine after the fall of the Second Temple. So picture 70 AD. Temple falls to Rome, and then this guy apparently was born within 20 years of that time. So Israel at the time began the diaspora. People were leaving Israel. You know, they were being crushed, and then basically, this guy wrote during a transition to rabbinic history of Judaism away from the temple. So they no longer had the temple to worship in, but then they had rabbis, 70 rabbis that ran the government. And then later, Hadrian comes along and he announces that he's going to rebuild Jerusalem as a pagan city. And this sparks the third rebellion called the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 132. And totally destroys. Israel's just annihilated. Okay, so that's the historic setting of this. So the idea of this book is that it takes us away from the academic discussion. It's really about faith versus reason and philosophy, but it's not academic. So it opens it says, toward the end of the first century, in the spring of the last year of the Emperor Vespasian, 2 entries were made in Roman archives in the district of Galilee. The first registered the fact that a male heir had been born to one Abuya, Jewish patrician, and then his wife, Abuya, the mother child, was apparently died, okay, in his childbirth. And then the next paragraph, thus only kinsmen of the first degree and most intimate of friends gathered at the sorrow-shrouded villa on the 8th day after the birth of the baby to witness the circumcision. So he draws you from the historical setting immediately into his fiction narrative. So you're immediately into the story, and then at the appointed time, Sapphira the wet nurse stood in one of the corridors of the house, holding the sleeping infant close to her full bosom. So these are not things in the abstract, but during the circumcision, this is the first page of the novel. There's intense hatred between the father and the uncle because the father is a Greek lover, loves Greek books, and the uncle is rabbinic. Okay, he doesn't want anything to do outside of Jewish faith, and the father doesn't even witness his own son's circumcision. So you have immediate emotions affecting belief, and then the dualism between Hebrew and Roman is the same as faith versus reason. So he sets up that dynamic. Okay. Okay. So in the next few chapters, early education, the father gets a Greek teacher who's trying to teach this little boy the Iliad, and the Greek teacher falls asleep. And the kid runs out and plays with his friend Papas. And lo and behold, the first thing they come is head to head with 2 Roman soldiers. We're just passing through. So this is childhood stuff. This is his environment when he was little. Okay, and he's basically the subject for Rome and everything. So then eventually his father also dies, and then his uncle sends him to Joshua, who gets a standard rabbinic training, teaches them all about Hebrew tradition, and introduces young Elisha to the Sanhedrin, which is the 70 sages that determine everything in Israel. Okay. So at an early age, this guy's a super smart guy. Okay. He visits these sages, and this is what they talk about among the rabbis, these questions. Might the evil of the world be imputed to minor angelic beings without impugning the sovereignty of God? Was the book of Ecclesiastes to be regarded as sacred writ despite its skeptical, cynical sentiments? Was it heresy to deny the resurrection of the body if one believed in the immortality of the soul? Okay, so these are rabbinic questions that just circulate And then might the restriction on labor on the Sabbath be waived in tending a sick person? So this is actually governance, like, and it's all based on rabbinic law. So at this meeting of the Sanhedrin, Elisha meets his lifetime friend Akiba, who's also mentioned in the Talmud. Okay, and so the story takes off from there. So what happens is that what I'm going to do is give you just a brief outline of the plot. I'm sure you won't actually read this, so. So Elisha ends up denying the existence of God. He gets a crisis of faith and he's excommunicated. So Elisha goes to live in Antioch, which is the huge city in Asia Minor, the third largest city in the world. And he has sex and has basically his lover is this woman named Martha, who happens to be the favorite consort of the Roman governor, Rufus. Okay, so Rufus actually lived too. But this is fiction. I mean, the characterization of what he did in Antioch is actually made up by the author. Okay. So anyway, Rufus knows about his consort, that she actually loves Elisha. Okay. And meanwhile, he's trying to prove that you could use reason to prove faith. Okay, this is Elisha's thing. So what happens is that things are rocking along, and then the Bar Kokhba rebellion takes place. This is years later, and 3 years of Roman soldiers march into Palestine and pretty much annihilate the Jewish army. And then Rufus orders Elisha to come back from Antioch and move into Jerusalem, his old place, and basically become an informant. So Elisha is told that he should come back, live in Jerusalem, and basically tell the Romans everything he knows about where Jews meet, what their worship style is. And the whole point is for the Romans to develop an edict that will essentially stop Judaism in its tracks. Okay. So
you said he was excommunicated. It was by the Jews.
yeah, but his colleagues, if you're excommunicated, it's not just like you leave the church. No one will talk to you in Israel. Okay. So I mean, you could walk down the street and no one will look at you. So he has to leave to Antioch. Okay. So anyway, Elisha agrees to this. It makes sense to him. He believes in Pax Romana, and his rational philosophy tells him that it's better to protect Rome, keep people safe in the empire, than to help his old friends in Israel or Judea resist in something that they would have lost anyway. And so what I'm going to do is segue now. Basically, I won't take too much time. I'll just read a few passages. So here we are at the end toward the end of the novel. Okay, 30 pages left of the novel. Rufus now has gone ahead and imprisoned Elisha. Okay, in the prison in Caesarea. Okay. And all of the rabbis, including Akiba, have been rounded up and they're about to be executed. Okay. So I'm going to read this passage to you, and I'm going to read just 4 or 5 passages to let you get the flavor of the novel. Okay. So here's the description of the prison. The corridor was dank and except for the yellow light wavering from the tip of the torch, altogether dark. At regular intervals, they passed heavy doors into which the square openings had been cut a foot or so above the floor. Through these little apertures came the sound of subdued stirrings. Occasionally a chain clattered, but one cell muttered profanity, screamed, and another sobbing whine. Alicia shuddered for the unforeseen bodies that rotted in the foul darkness, for the figures crouched to the floor, eager to break the monotony of the long years of the unwanted side by the unwanted side of passing feet. Okay, so it's a pretty dark prison. So anyway, Alicia is finally in prison, and he comes across through the grave his old friend Papas. Okay. So they have a conversation, and Alicia, of course, is saying, "Oh, I didn't really destroy Israel or turn everyone in." And Papas is going, "Oh, don't worry about it." So here's a passage of what happens in the prison. Meanwhile, a huckster's voice became clearer. This is someone selling things outside the prison, and you can hear him inside the prison selling his thimbles and stuff. So Alicia caught the word needles, thread, thimbles, needles, thread, thimbles. Something about the crying disturbed Alicia. It was the use of Hebrew. So far, he could remember that there was no Jew in the vicinity of the prison. And even if there were, it was strange to hear someone hawking his wares in the tongue of the synagogue rather than in Aramaic, the speech of the street and marketplace. Why does he call it Hebrew? Hebrew? Papas echoed. You must be mistaken. It is so hard to hear correctly. Why, I had climbed up to the grating to ask for food, only to discover that they were selling cosmetics. Papa's voice, rising in volume, babbled on. So then he goes, needles, thread, thimbles. Hakimi has been arrested. Needles, thread, thimbles. A woman's husband has disappeared. Needles, thread, thimbles. Sold to a gladiatorial show. Needles, thread, thimbles. The case is before the court at Usha. Needles, thread, thimbles. Is the woman free to remarry on the presumption of her husband's death? Needles, thread, thimbles, all very cheap. What is the law on this point? A prisoner irritated by the sing-song shouting in the exasperation, "Go away, keep still." The voice of the peddler rose even louder. Needles, thread, thimbles. The book known as the Psalm of Solomon. Needles, thread, thimbles. What is its exact status? Needles, thread, thimbles. That is all. How much are your needles? A deep voice rang out from the corridor. Alas for Hakimi. Are the colors fast in your thread? The woman is not free to remarry until someone testifies that her husband was seen entering the arena for the games. Otherwise, there is no presumption of death. What are your thimbles made of? The Psalms of Solomon are apocryphal and not to be regarded as sacred writing. Do you have my order? I have, came the voice from the street below. May God bless you for it. Needles, thread, thimbles. The chant died away in the distance. So, who's in that cell? Alicia answered. Akiba. So his lifetime friend Akiba, who stayed in Israel and kept his faith, is still managing to run. So even for the dungeon, Akiba decides cases of the law. Okay, so that gives you a flavor of the tension between faith, Akiba, and reason, which has led this guy to become a traitor. Okay.
When was it? You said this was written in
1939.
Is this some type of historical allegory of
Oh, yeah, I mean,
what was going on
with
the
Germany.
Holocaust?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's really interesting. So, okay, so I'll just read you a few passages and then, so going back to history, what happened in the rabbinic era is that Trajan and Hadrian, Trajan first agreed to let the Jews rebuild the wall, rebuild the temple a third time, and then he reneges. And but there's a point where this is way earlier in the story where he's still in Judea and he's friends with Aqaba. And what I'm going to do is read to you the historical narrative, okay? So basically, no Jew is allowed into Jerusalem. You're not allowed to live there. It's just a wall, okay, it's left. And Trajan sends a legion to defend Jerusalem, keep Jews out. And it's known, I guess, historically that there's like one sentry perched on the wall that watches the wall 24/7. Okay, a Roman sentry. So I'm going to read you a passage just so you get a flavor. This is what we know historically, and this is what this guy writes about it. So they go on a pilgrimage to see Jerusalem, the sages do. All day long, from the moment when the sun rose in a blur of mist until late afternoon, they chanted on their way. The countryside, faintly seen through the drifting fog, grew wilder and more desolate. Bleak hillsides, denuded by the Romans in their campaign to take Jerusalem, ran with water. It seeped through the broken terraces, washing away the soil where once gardens and olive groves had flourished. These mountains had become indeed a land which the Lord had cursed, which had vomited forth its inhabitants. At that night, when the sages were encamped near Emmaus, where once Judah the Maccabee had won a great victory, they intoned together an ancient song of ascents. When the Lord turned the captivity of Zion, we were as those who dreamed. Then were our mouths filled with laughter and our tongues with joy. I, the Lord, hath done great things for us, wherefore we were glad. Turn thou, O Lord, our captivity into the rivulets in the southland. The night was chill, and dark vapors shifted spectrally about the feeble campfires. The thought of those who had perished in blood and fire wove into itself its magic spell. Okay, so basically they go the next day and they look down on Jerusalem. At the very moment when they reached the hilltop, the wind shifted and tore the veil of rain asunder. A moan broke from them at the sight of the utter waste before them. Below at their feet curved the valley of Jehoshaphat, for centuries the burial ground of Jerusalem. Weeds crowded about the great tombs of ancient nobles and blanketed the untended graves of the humble. Across the valley and beyond the sacred mountain towered the Akra, fortified as in the days of Jewish glory, but garrisoned now by a cohort of the 10th Legion Praetensis. On one of its crenellated battlements, a Roman sentry, his armor hidden by a gray hooded raincoat, stood huddled against the wind and rain like some bedraggled bird of ill omen brooding over the valley below. So you can see how he takes an image like the sentry posted on the wall. So this is how he weaves a narrative out of the history. Okay. So I'm going to read one more passage and then I'll talk about the philosophy. Okay, so here's a passage from the time Ellis is in Antioch. Okay, so he's having sex with Malta, the gorgeous woman. He's being introduced to all the intellectuals in Antioch, having the time of his life. So Malta takes him to a slave. Malta has to buy a slave, okay? So here's his description of the market in Antioch. The market consisted of a series of cells opening onto a central court. On platforms, men stood stark naked while a group of prospective purchasers examined them. Dealers, slaves, and idlers lounged on benches about the sidewalls. A blustering trader came up to them. What can I do for you, lady? I'm interested in buying a girl for my kitchen, a young girl, healthy and above all obedient. My steward got one for me at this very market not so long ago. She turned out to be a quarrelsome nuisance. You'll have her back tomorrow. The merchant shrugged his shoulders. We never guarantee a slave's character. Will you come this way? He led them to a vacant platform. And now what would you like? An Egyptian, German, Briton, Gaul, Negro, or someone homebred? It does not matter so long as she is obedient and speaks Greek. Summoning an attendant, the trader whispered instructions into his ear. The assistant crossed the courtyard, opened a cell door, and led forth a corpulent negress. Monto waved her hand at once, and the woman was returned to her pen. Next, the assistant brought out a flaxen-haired girl dressed in a scanty shift that descended to just below her loins. Her body was robust and magnificently developed. She is a Saxon, said the trader, and speaks with an accent that understands Greek thoroughly. Shall I put her on the block and have her stripped? Others waiting for such a moment rose from their seats and sauntered forward to get a better view of the woman. But Monto shook her head. No, too good looking. She will merely make trouble among the men slaves. Okay, so this gives you an idea. What he does is he drops you ins at this time. Okay. So I'll do the philosophy now. So, okay, so what happens is, Elisha, we're going back in time again. So here's Elisha. I'm going to start the story the third time, back when Elisha's with the rabbis and he's working in Israel. So here's the first hint of Elisha's conversion to the dark side. This really is like Darth Vader. Okay, so eager for new scenes and faces, Elisha required little persuasion. Since the death of Meir's children and the performance in the Samaritan village, he had been engaged in a constant, frantic struggle, either to suppress his doubts, to will himself into his original unreflecting acceptance, or to dispel them by an appeal to reason. In the course of several months, he had met with not the faintest glimmering of success. So he becomes suddenly haunted with doubts. So what does he do? He's friends with Aqaba and these two other Jews, and he discusses upon with them, and they're still friends, and they say, okay, we'll discuss with you, and he wants to prove reason is the basis of faith. Okay, reason comes before faith. And but the guy is very obstinate. So he goes to Caesarea, and he actually interviews various people. So what happens is that instead of being a scholastic study about philosophy, comparing faith and reason, the objects become real people in the novel. So he goes to Caesarea, he meets with the Nazarene Jew, okay, and the Nazarene says, yeah, well, we uphold the entire tradition of the Jewish faith. We just accept that Jesus was the Messiah. And we're different from the Gentiles because they throw out the entire law, okay? So it's not hard to understand, but every one of them looks at this guy's stance, and Elisha will not listen. He's just so set on his ways. Okay, so what happens? Basically, he becomes more obstinate. He divorces his wife because she won't have a husband that doesn't believe in God. he gets excommunicated and spends years trying to develop his own philosophy to prove, and it's particularly about Euclid. Okay, so what he wants to do is, like Euclid built geometry based on postulates, he wants to build faith, morality, all on postulates that are just plain true. Okay, so basically it gets kind of out of hand because he goes against his own people and becomes a traitor because of his without conscience. I don't know all the, I'm losing track of the pages, but he just refuses to listen to reason, even while he's advocating reason, to be the thing about everything. So what I'm going to do is,
One question.
yeah,
The first century, the Common Era, did people then sort of look at that the same way? Like the Romans thought their belief had to do with reason and
right. So I think these
3% later concept.
were real issues at the time. So for us, it's like we can learn about it in junior high, start learning about faith versus reason, or in college we can compare Plato with, Rabbi so and so. But to them, living then, this was who they were. You were like a Nazarene Christian living in Caesarea, or if you went to Antioch, you could be a rhetorician or a philosopher of Greek poetry, or and they would meet in society. So you go to Antioch, which is a big city, and you would actually be immersed in that kind of culture where you'd have brilliant people actually debating these things.
Thank you.
Okay, so okay, so here we go, and this is my little philosophy thing. Very, very end of the book. Okay, this is after all his friends have been executed. He has no one in the world. He still wants to prove his philosophy. So after all this, he lives in Caesarea, and he meets this philosopher named Pericles. And I think that this passage is actually the author's own take on philosophy and reason, okay, that he puts here. So Pericles, and I'm just saying this, I'm throwing this out. I know it's very introverted on my part, but Pericles is saying, see how generous nature has been with us, equipping our minds from birth in sure truths for which we know not labor, for which no person ever challenges. Will the boldest skeptic deny that 2 and 2 equal 4, no more, no less? That the whole is the sum of its parts, that equals added to equals yield equals, and that every affect must have a cause. Okay, these are just things that you're supposed to take at face value. And he's so happy because he can say there are realms where certainty is not ours already, areas of math, physics, and even of metaphysics where old insistent riddles have been solved for all time. And for remaining areas of human interest, they were not without hope, provided that we exercise caution, probity, and patience to probe who this is, okay? So this is what the 20th century sort of thing. So I agree. And then Elsha comes up and he starts saying, well, I'm not sure I agree with you. Okay. So here Elisha has nothing left in his life. So you have posited the validity of the deductive process, but what happens when you form a syllogism? You take major premise A, minor premise B, and deduce conclusion C. You say when you are through that C follows inevitably from A and B. But what do you mean by that? Only that you have a sentiment of congruity, an emotion of fittingness, Our sentiments is stuff of rational demonstration. So this is modern philosophy. You could say, yeah, this makes logical sense to me, but really all you're saying is, wow, that makes me feel like I heard something that makes me feel inclusive or something, or there's a emotional answer.
You know, it makes the world make sense.
It makes the world make sense. Okay, so, right, so I'll share my rabbit hole with you. I don't like Kant myself. But this guy Pericles is like Kant. So he says, we need not labor with person over challenges. The boldest skeptic deny that 2 and 2 equal 4. Okay, so in Kant, you know, if you accept a basic premise like that, you can prove that you can tell what's true and what are the limits of human knowledge and reason and all this. But you have to accept a premise like there is a truth like 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, but I look at it like, suppose a bird's building a nest. Does a bird count how many twigs it uses, or could you even do it? I mean, count like discrete twigs and get a precise number. So when I see 2 + 2 = 4, it sounds very humanoid and kind of sanitized or something. Like we teach a kid 2 + 2 = 4, and the kid's all happy, but that doesn't mean that it means anything. Okay, so that's my rabbit hole. Okay, so talk about skepticism.
The philosopher you said, I forgot.
Well,
Charon or.
Oh, Charles,
That's a fictional character.
fictional, yeah.
Okay, but the author is grabbing.
The author's trying to demonstrate his own debate. So the last point is that Elisha goes immediately to Euclid. Okay, this is his thing. Okay. Let us imagine, Elisha went on, that this is a straight line and then a point beyond it. Together they form the diagram of the postulate that runs from the point outside the line. Only one line can be drawn parallel to the original. This is the parallel line postulate. Now I ask you, what is the proof of that assertion? Proof, Pericles cried in astonishment, is a postulate and hence by definition needs none. Okay, we just accept it. But then Elisha says, not me, I have a much harder time visualizing and conceiving the parallel postulate. Okay. So, Pericles says, no, it's self-evident, but not so immediately. You know, they start arguing about it. And finally, Pericles says, why, oh God, he urged appeasingly, don't take it so seriously. It is only an academic question. Why you act as though your life could be ruined by it, by this question about the parallel postulate. And Elisha's reply, it has been. So I don't know if you Rice people can understand the parallel postulate, but you know, this is our entire conception of the architecture of space. Like we can see 2 lines that just go forever and ever in straight line, parallel, you know, no, basically to infinity. And why do we even think this is true? Because Euclid is taught to us in grade school. So it's this kind of reasoning, and it just meant something to me because I go down the same rabbit holes, or but anyway, the fact that Steinberg puts that like 5 pages before the end of the book made me think that he's sort of going down that rabbit hole too.
So would you say that it's a study, it's a fictional tale to bring forth these observations on philosophy,
Right.
versus religious philosophy?
Yeah.
Greek philosophy, let's call it, versus religious philosophy. And what I'm hearing is like many of us, there's this challenge, right? There's a problem and you pick the argument. If it's the parallel lines, okay, in Euclidean geometry, they're never gonna touch. And we've been told that, and so therefore,
Well, we built our entire space
what
station.
it is true.
Yeah,
Because we've been told as a child, that's a truth.
right.
But if I say, oh, well, until we talk about, relativity and the fact that space, if you think of it that way, it's not a grid, right? And now those lines could touch. If I tell you, oh, we're gonna take a right turn, a right turn, a right turn, and a right turn and make a square. Okay, I'm gonna take a right turn, a right turn, a right turn and come back to where I started. That's a triangle, but it's not if you're on the surface of the earth. Because you're not curving and you.
I think people have basically
So it depends on what you're talking about. Is that the fundamental issue? Is that the rabbis are like, I don't want to go in that path because eventually you reach a point where you start to question faith. And we're, scared of that. I don't want people thinking about that because there is no answer and I will lose believers. And so if you're going to bring that topic up, I'm going to excommunicate you because we want to keep it tight.
Right.
Is that the story of this song or?
Okay, I'm not debating that people haven't thought about these issues, and like anyone working on the NASA space station, I'm sure knows the limits of Euclidean geometry and or relativity, or they understand how that works. But I think what this guy does is more religious. So he's looking at a basic premise in the 30s, and he's showing that our emotions affect the way we see a postulate or truth, how it affects us, how we can get caught up in something and just insist that something's correct and we never get off the pot ever. I mean, but the kind of skepticism though, where you actually doubt that I can accept that 2 + 2 = 4 is just plain true. I mean, and so I think there's an area where it needs to be looked at, even as we build our space stations, and send all our data numerically and everything, that Steinberg probably has something to tell us that no, you can't just assume Euclidean thinking and arithmetic but this guy tries to show how faith, temperament, feeling, history are all components of that kind of philosophy. I think he does a good job. I mean, it's something, instead of looking through minute arguments, you just read the novel and you see the conversations, and it helps you kind of see it curve.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of reminds me of, there's these arguments, going back and forth. And, the book of Job, they're trying to rationally explain. Job's friends trying to rationally explain why all these bad things are happening. Arguing that, he deserved it or he did something wrong, and then, that you could rationally explain everything that happens. And that you can kind of understand through that rationally, that basically God, is rational, and that there are rational reasons why everything happens. And as I read Job, it's kind of like, well, maybe you really can't. That the mind of God is beyond our explanation and our understanding, and I think that's somewhat similar to the issues you're talking about here. That the world.
The world may not be the way we picture it. I believe that's true.
That
But I
may not be able to explain everything in a rational.
Right.
2 + 2 = 4.
Right. And
That's the question, is when does this idea, whole idea of impossible, it's just all art, actually, no less than it. Inside of what you're fitting in geometry, you can build some really cool stuff. But it may not be truth, and especially if you try to apply something outside there, possibly you come up with that disadvantage. Existing power structures or existing values, it wants to be. What they give life to is gonna matter. And what they allow to be possible in and around.
Joe,
anything just highlighting the fact that it's folly to think that we can rationalize everything.
well, I think that you can look for things that might cause problems when you make assumptions. I'm not an expert on this. I'm just saying it's something you would think about. But about Job, so as the driven leaf is from a verse in Job, it's wherefore hidest thou thy face? Wilt thou harass a driven leaf? This is out of Job where he's arguing with God. And so, yeah, it really hits into the idea that, how much, to what extent do we want to really stand up to God and tell him we haven't figured out or whatever. So.
Thank you very much.